Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Before we take up today's discussion, we have a few important announcements. As part of the Explained series, today at 8 pm, we shall be discussing the National Logistics Policy, which has been in the news over the last week. So don't forget to attend this session live, which will be held by Harshmeet sir on our YouTube channel at 8 pm. Then Byjus Exam Prep IAS is glad to present a series of offline workshops for IAS aspirants. These workshops will be held across multiple cities on the 25th of September, that is on this Sunday, which will begin with a mock practice test between 4 to 5 pm, followed by the workshop between 5 to 7 pm. These workshops will be conducted by our leading IAS trainers across cities including New Delhi, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Lucknow. And we shall also have a Hindi workshop in Delhi. So don't miss this opportunity to get your IAS preparation started. And for further details, you can take a look at the description box below for the location and as well as the registration details. Then finally, don't forget to join our Telegram channel for regular updates on current affairs, as we are conducting a Telegram exclusive program on political thinkers and ideas. And today at 7 pm, the last episode of the series on M.N. Roy will go live in order to help your preparation for the essay paper, ethics paper, and as well as for your political science optional. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 8 of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the topic of inner party democracy, and on page number 9, The Hindu even carries a related interview that helps us understand the topic of inner party democracy in complete detail. So let's break down this topic and go beyond these articles to develop a comprehensive understanding of this important topic, which is very relevant for polity under GS paper 2. See, this key topic is in news because of three recent developments. One, the Indian National Congress is all set to hold internal elections within the party for the post of its party president. 2. The Election Commission of India has rejected the idea of having a permanent party president, as recently YSR Congress, which is the ruling party in Andhra Pradesh, elected its Chief Minister Jagan Mohan Reddy as the permanent president of the party for life. And finally, in Britain, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was removed as the leader of the ruling party by his own MPs, thus displaying the power of inner party democracy in UK. So these developments have triggered a debate on the need for internal elections and internal democracy within political parties. Because if you look at Britain and its political parties, internally parties have provided for a democratic setup where members of the party and elected representatives of the party can even question the top leadership and take a stand against the party's position. And these powers even go to the extent where MPs from the ruling party even enjoy extraordinary powers over the Prime Minister, thus displaying true internal democracy within their political parties. Because it has been long argued that in a democratic setup where governments are directly elected by the people, even the political parties need to display democratic features within their organization in order to truly uphold the principles of a democracy. So while in the case of Britain, inner party democracy has been provided for, if you compare this with Indian parties, you will notice that the top leadership of political parties exercise absolute control over their members and elected representatives. And in the case of the ruling party, the Prime Minister exercises absolute authority over the elected MPs as well. In the Indian political system, inner party democracy is largely missing in most of the political parties. And if the members and elected representatives, if they were to even slightly diverge from the party's position, especially from the stand taken by the top leadership and the high command, they are most likely to be removed from the party itself, thereby curbing their freedom of speech and expression. Then upon this, India's anti-defection law further strengthens the power of the Prime Minister over the MPs, Because if the members of the ruling party were to go against the party's line and if they were to disobey the orders of the whip, they stand to be disqualified as per the provisions of the anti-defection law. So in short, elected representatives of Indian political parties and even their members, they enjoy no autonomy and have no freedom to question or challenge their leadership, which basically reduces them to mere cheerleaders or mouthpieces of the party. This essentially promotes the culture of dynastic politics and individual persona based leadership, where a single leader or his family continues to dominate the affairs of the political party, thereby leading to a complete erosion of democratic practices within the political party. In the case of India, if you look at national level parties, they are either afflicted by dynastic politics, where few families that form the top leadership and the high command continue to dominate the party, or we see cases where parties are dominated by strong leaders, which essentially wipes out the voices of the members and the elected representatives. The same can be seen in the case of regional parties as well, where popular individual leaders and their families dominate the affairs of the political parties, thereby violating internal democracy within the party. And this, according to legal and constitutional experts, has serious consequences for the state of democracy in the country. So, in this context, it becomes essential to examine the need for inner party democracy and the hurdles that lie ahead for the introduction of inner party democracy in India's political system. See, if you look at India's Westminster model of parliamentary democracy, the voters elect their representatives once in every 5 years, who are supposed to act as the voice of the voters at the legislature, that is, at the parliament. And the party that manages to secure the majority goes on to form the executive of the government, which is expected to be held accountable by the elected representatives. But in the absence of true inner party democracy in Indian political parties, especially within the ruling parties, it becomes impossible for the elected representatives and the party members to hold their party leaders accountable. And it is all the more difficult for members of the ruling party to question the government or to take a contradictory position against the government and the top leadership, because they stand to be disqualified under the provisions of the anti-defection law if they disobey the orders of the party. Whereas if you compare this with the UK model, where parties have implemented inner party democracy, the MPs, they act boldly even against the leadership and even take a stand against the leaders. And they do not hesitate to go against the stand taken by the party leadership, because their nomination, that is the election ticket, given out to the representatives to contest elections, is not solely decided by the party leader. Instead, nominations are decided by the local party units at the constituency level, thereby empowering the representatives to act boldly and autonomously. In India, however, this is not the case, because the party leadership, the high command, gets to decide as to who gets the tickets during elections, and they barely consult the local constituency units of the party while making this decision. Even if they consult, it happens to be an informal discussion, and the party leadership retains sole control over who is given election tickets, thereby making the members and the representatives completely subservient to the party leadership. In UK, members of the ruling party, they don't stand the risk of disqualification, and they are free to speak out against the government and the leader and even take a stand against the government, thereby ensuring true inner party democracy in the UK. Whereas this happens to be the biggest hurdle in the case of India, and hence legal and constitutional experts argue for instilling inner party democracy in the Indian political system. This debate in India goes back to the Rajiv Gandhi period of 1980s, when the then government enacted the anti-defection law. Following the enactment of this law and its introduction into the 10th schedule of the Constitution, the Rajiv Gandhi government made political parties to submit their internal constitution to the Election Commission of India. And the Representation of People Act 1951 was even amended by the government to introduce a new section, Section 29A, according to which all registered political parties were mandated to abide by their own party constitution and to uphold democratic practices within the party affairs. Following the introduction of Section 29A to the Representation of People Act, the Election Commission of India took a firm stand in this regard to enforce this provision under Chief Election Commissioner T.N. Seshan, who was even feared by the political parties for a strict enforcement of the guidelines, as the Election Commission declared that political parties might be deregistered by the Election Commission if they do not follow their own internal constitution. But however, there is a legal loophole here because the Election Commission does not have the legal or constitutional backing to strictly enforce such provisions. And this position has even been upheld by the Supreme Court, that Election Commission cannot take punitive action against political parties and deregister them if they violate the principles of their inner constitution. So in the absence of this legal constitutional framework, the Election Commission has found it difficult to enforce these provisions, as it also gives rise to concerns that the Election Commission might become an all-powerful body that could end up unnecessarily interfering in the political system. So in this regard, the Law Commission of India in 1999 submitted a report calling for a regulatory framework to govern the internal structure and constitution of political parties, to ensure that inner party democracy was enforced in political parties through a legal framework. In fact, in 2011, a bill was even drafted by the Ministry of Law and Justice on these lines. But unfortunately, the bill was stalled due to the lack of political will within the government and as well as amongst the political parties. Both national and regional parties are hesitant to enforce inner party democracy and to hold their leadership accountable as they fear losing control. And this has led to a situation where parties hold inner party elections just for the sake of it, where the top leadership gets elected unanimously or with barely any opposition, as the members and representatives are scared to question the high command and the leadership. And this is a problem that affects almost every political party in India. Now let's take up an important column from page number 10, in which the author Rishabh Kachru analyzes the latest conflict that has broken out between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Last week on the 14th of September, fresh border clashes broke out between Central Asian countries, that is Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and as a result of these clashes, more than 100 people have been killed, with many more injured and thousands of people have been displaced. These violent clashes have broken out between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, which happen to be key Central Asian countries that share a nearly 1,000-kilometer border, which is largely disputed, thus leading to frequent clashes and conflict in the Batken region that you see over here over the sharing of resources present in the region. So with regard to the demarcation of boundaries in the Batken region and sharing of resources such as water and land, frequent conflicts and clashes have taken place between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. This dispute and the recent escalation that it has seen has serious implications for Central Asian geopolitics, where India also happens to be a key player, and thus the conflict could have implications for Indian interests in Central Asia. You might know that Central Asia is blessed with natural resources, and as India enjoys close relations with almost all the Central Asian countries, it has been very eager to connect with Central Asian countries with better infrastructure and connectivity projects to tap into the natural resources of Central Asian countries. Earlier this year, in January 2022, India and Central Asia held a summit through which the two sides have cemented their relationship while agreeing to step up Indian investments and involvement in the region. Here, India faces a stiff competition from China and other global powers, including US and Russia, which already have a deep influence in Central Asia. And along with competing with these countries, India also has a priority to cooperate with Central Asian countries on counterterrorism, as the region is affected by radicalism and fundamentalism that spills over from Afghanistan, Pakistan. So while India has such major interests in Central Asia, the conflict between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan might pose a new challenge to Indian diplomacy, as India might find it very difficult to choose sides between the two countries. So in this context, one needs to be familiar with the background to this conflict. This dispute between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan is a relic of the Soviet-era policies. Back in the 19th century, today's Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they were occupied by the then Russian Empire, and later these regions merged with the Soviet Union in the 20th century. So all the Central Asian republics, including Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, were essentially part of the Soviet Union during the Cold War period, during which, under the policies of Soviet Union and under Stalin's leadership, various delimitation policies were implemented to determine the national borders in the Fergana Valley region that is located at the tri-junction of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. With regard to Fergana Valley located over here, India shares a close historical cultural connection as well, as Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, came from the Fergana Valley, and even today India has close involvement in the region along with close cultural links with the region. So during the Soviet period, the national borders were delimited multiple times through various agreements and policies, and territories were even exchanged between different republics as part of land loans. And eventually the Soviet Union ended up creating a complex geography in the region. But after the Soviet Union disintegrated and collapsed in 1991, which brought the Cold War to an end, these former Soviet republics became independent Central Asian nations. And as a result of Soviet-era land and border policies, the new countries found it very difficult to settle their boundaries, especially Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, ended up creating a complex border which is often equated with a chessboard, as their territories are located as enclaves and exclaves, as these territories are entirely surrounded by another country. Tajikistan, for example, has two exclaves located in Kyrgyzstan. So essentially, these Tajik territories are entirely surrounded by Kyrgyzstan. So this creates challenges with regard to access, connectivity and sharing of resources, especially sharing of water and land, thus often leading to conflicts and clashes between farmers and as well as between local ethnic groups, as the region happens to be ethnically diverse. So since their independence from 1991, both Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have disputed their ownership over territories in the border areas, and they've tried to cement their respective claims by citing Soviet-era maps and agreements. And this lack of understanding on a settled border has led to frequent clashes and conflicts in the region. So this 31-year-old dispute stands right in the middle of Central Asia in the strategic Fergana Valley, and any further escalation of conflict between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan could have serious implications for the region and as well as for Indian interests. Until last year, these tensions were limited to minor clashes involving the farmers, cattle grazers and local ethnic groups. But last year, these tensions escalated seriously between the two governments and the armed forces. And we saw the breakout of a major conflict in April 2021 after Tajikistan decided to set up video surveillance in its territories, which are also claimed by Kyrgyzstan. This escalation led to a military standoff and led to the breakout of a limited military conflict in which several people were killed and injured on both the sides. This year again, we have seen a resurgence of this violence as local farmers and cattle grazers have conflicting claims over shared resources such as water and land. See, during the Soviet era, in the region, collective farming was promoted, known as the Kolkhoz system. These were essentially collective state-owned farms, which were later redistributed amongst the Central Asian countries post-independence. And as a result, Tajikistan saw an increase in its livestock population, but with very limited land available to feed the cattle. So later agreements were signed between the two countries to allow the farmers to utilize Kyrgyz territory for Tajiks' livestock. But following the complete collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, the sharing of these resources has become contested due to shortage of water and also due to limited availability of land. These local clashes and tensions further escalate due to the ethnic divide between Tajiks, Kyrgyz and Uzbeks, and the politicization of the issue by the respective governments has led to increased tensions, which eventually have led to conflicts last year and as well as this year. As of now, a ceasefire has been called between the two countries with the mediation of Russia, which still remains the most influential power in the region. But the continuation of these tensions could lead to an imbalance in the geopolitical equations of the region and might even pose a tough challenge for India, which has significant stakes in the region, as India might find it difficult to choose sides between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, both of which happen to be close friends of India. Now let's take up a column from page number 8, which helps us understand the importance of census. This column has been brought out to highlight the importance of census in governance, as the government seems to have delayed holding the 2021 census by citing the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse. And hence the writer of the column goes on to argue why such delays in census is unaffordable for a democratic state like India. See, a census is essentially an enumeration of its population. It's an exercise or a process through which data on the citizens and residents is collected, compiled, analyzed to obtain key demographic indicators on its population, along with generating socio-economic insights, which can become a critical tool for analyzing the population trends of a country along with its key demographic features. A census exercise not just captures the population of the country, but also helps in breaking down the demography of its population on the lines of age, sex, religion and caste, and also helps determine the socio-economic status of the people by identifying their educational status, health status, and more importantly, livelihood standards. So essentially, the significance of census exercise is multifold, as it serves as a vital source of information for researchers, academicians, and demographers to make key projections and identify trends that not only serves an academic purpose, but more importantly, it will help the state, that is the government, to implement good governance and welfare schemes and measures by fine-tuning its programs and by designing them to target the right population based on census data and parameters. It essentially provides for efficient policy making and targeted interventions on several key socio-economic developmental issues. It also helps in delimitation of constituencies for elections and also helps the private industry as well to craft its business plans and strategies based on census data. More importantly, the census data serves as the basis for providing grants to states through the Finance Commission. So overall, census figures play a vital role in socio-economic development and governance of the country. In this regard, India has a rich history of conducting census since the ancient medieval times. For example, the Rig Veda makes a mention of a census-like exercise to estimate the population count that was maintained during 800 to 600 BC. Even Kautilya's Arthashastra highlights the importance of a census, based on which the state's taxation policy was implemented. And Ain-e-Akbari of the Mughal Empire also refers to a comprehensive report on the state's population, which in turn was being used in administration and governance. Coming to modern times, during the colonial era, India's first formal census was introduced in 1872, which was conducted non-synchronously, that is in different periods across different parts of the country under Governor General Lord Mayo. From here onwards, census became a regular feature of India and decadal censuses were introduced from 1881, and it has been conducted every decade without fail, without any gap, despite diseases, epidemics, world wars, partition, and other turmoils. So in this context, the writer argues that the pandemic is no excuse for the government to delay the census for 2021, as the data is vital for socio-economic governance and for overall welfare of the state. The writer points out how census data in the past has helped the government understand the extent of key social challenges such as declining gender ratio as a result of female feticide and infanticide due to the prevalent male bias in the patriarchal Indian society. This led subsequent governments to design targeted intervention programs to tackle the social menace. Now let's take a look at this article from page number 1 and 12 that points to the declining Maoist movement along the Andhra-Odisha border, which at one point was a major hub of Naxal and Maoist activity. See, after Maoism took root in India in the Naxal Bari village of West Bengal in 1967, this left-wing extremist movement known as Naxalism or Maoism quickly spread to other parts of India by capitalizing on the governance deficiencies that existed across the rural and tribal belt of India. So through the 1970s and 1980s, two separate strands of Maoism emerged one of which was centered around Bihar and West Bengal and as well as today's Jharkhand, and this movement was led by the Maoist Communist Center of India. Parallelly, in the 1980s, another movement rose along the Andhra Pradesh-Odisha border, having influence in Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh as well, led by a group known as PWG or the People's War Group, along with another left-wing extremist known as CPI Marxist-Leninist that was leading the movement in India. This insurgency grew in strength throughout 1980s and 1990s and started posing a significant threat to India's internal security. But as the government of India and state governments stepped up their counter-insurgency operations against these Naxal outfits, and as governance also started improving in the Naxal corridor, these outfits saw a decline in their influence, and it led these outfits to make a strategic decision in 2004 to merge these outfits to form the notorious CPI Maoist as a united single Maoist outfit leading an insurgent war against the Indian state. Since then, CPI Maoist stepped up its attacks by basing itself around the Dandakaranya region centered around Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh. But through a two-pronged strategy over the last 2 decades, the government of India and the state governments have achieved considerable success in pushing the Maoist movement towards its decline in India. The governments have adopted a mixed strategy of effective security operations based on real-time intelligence with better preparedness on the part of the security forces, where the center has backed up the state police forces with the CRPF along with advanced training and better equipment, thereby stepping up India's counter-insurgency operations against the Naxals. Parallelly, the government has focused on the governance deficiency and has improved administration at the grassroots with specific focus on the Naxal corridor and the left-wing extremist hit areas. This combined strategy has delivered success for the government, and just yesterday, the Bihar police and CRPF had announced a major success as the security forces have been able to clear the Naxal-infested areas of Bihar and Jharkhand, and they have managed to establish the dominance of the police and security forces once again in the Naxal corridor. Along with this positive development, it has also been reported that even along the Andhra Pradesh-Odisha belt, which currently happens to be a major hub of Naxalism led by the CPI Maoist, the police and security forces have achieved a major success by eliminating the top and mid-level leadership of the CPI Maoist and by crippling the operations of the group, thereby marking a major decline in Maoist activities in central and eastern India. These reports are even corroborated by the data of Ministry of Home Affairs, as it shows a considerable decline in Naxal activity, because around 15-20 years back, more than 180 districts in India were under the influence of Naxalism, and today this has been brought down to just around 30 odd districts, thereby marking a significant weakening of left-wing extremism, which has been considered as the most significant threat for India's internal security. Now, as we come to the end of today's discussion, let's take a look at a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: critically evaluate the need for inner party democracy in India's political system. The second question: what are the reasons behind the recent clashes between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan? What interest does India have in the region? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link has been provided in the description box below. So before we conclude today's discussion, let me remind you that if you benefited from the initiative, do support us by liking the video, share the video with fellow aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.